Good evening, all. Welcome again. We were together on Tuesday, and we are continuing the orientation. I'm only here for a couple of minutes, but I want to leave you with a number of references and a perspective that I hope you would develop as you go along. These references have nothing to do with HRD as such. None of the titles involve HRD. They're not HRD specific. None of the titles involve organizations. Nonetheless, the issues and the frameworks that they present, I think, is important for your development. The first author that I am introducing you to is a woman, an Indian woman with West Indian connections, and her name is Gurminder, Gurminder, Bhambra, Bhambra. She is the author of a book called Connected Sociologies, Theory for a Global Age. Connected Sociologies, Theories for a Global Age, published in 2014. And I can also give you the price on Amazon, but I'm not going to, because you might go there and see much more than this. What she argues, she says, I shall argue that a post-colonial connected sociology's approach, with its critique of Eurocentrism and its central concern with histories of colonialism and slavery, provide more adequate resources for making sense of our contemporary global world. So the study of organizations, in particular, the study of organizations in the contemporary space, involves global connections. To study organizations, you have to understand the global framework, and therefore you have to have a perspective on the global framework if you are studying organizations. But more than that, the global framework is understandable from our perspective insofar as we understand how the construction of the current global framework relates back to questions of colonialism and slavery. But not only do they relate back, right? It means that if we are going to understand that global framework today from a position of colonial histories and slaveries, we have to identify specific hierarchical orderings that are not always present in the sociologies that we inherit and in the various social science paradigms that we operate with. So that it is these hierarchical orderings that emerge from colonialism and slavery that are still with us today and are still to be understood and properly challenged. So I'm introducing you to this author and her post-colonial perspective. So I'm going to give you two other references from her. The other reference, we have one already, is called Rethinking Modernity. Rethinking Modernity, Post-Colonialism and the Sociological Imagination. Rethinking Modernity, Post-Colonialism and the Sociological Imagination. And the third reference, Towards a Post-Colonial Global Society, Towards a Post-Colonial Global Society. So that what these references will do would be to challenge you to understand sociology in a somewhat different way, but to understand it with reference to the present global moment, at the same time as understanding it through critique in a way that is most relevant to us. The second reference that I have for you, that's one, is a directly Caribbean reference, and it is a book called Caribbean Poetics, Towards an Aesthetic of West Indian Literature. Caribbean Poetics, Towards an Aesthetic of West Indian Literature, and the author is Torres Salant, Torres hyphen Saillant. So we move from post-colonialism to Caribbean poetics. But there is a link. In fact, when you get into Caribbean poetics, there are 2 points that we're making. The argument in Caribbean poetics is that here we have the original post-colonial framework. Here in Caribbean poetics, we have the original post-colonial framework. And secondly, post-colonialism is about interdisciplinarity. Post-colonialism is about interdiscipline interchanges. So that although most of organizational studies is founded on sociology, if we study organizations at this global moment and through a post-colonial imagination, we have to understand interdisciplinarity. And interdisciplinarity integrates not only psychology into sociology, but it also integrates poetics. And by poetics, I mean popular forms of culture and literature into the analysis as well. Because there are many forms of perception that are not captured by the so-called empirical disciplines. There are many forms of perception that are not captured by the so-called empirical disciplines. And very often, the disciplines of literature sensitizes us to the critical metaphors in a culture through which we then can pursue a greater empirical understanding. So what am I saying? That we started with an Indian sociologist. Indian, British, West Indian sociologists talking about a new global sociology. That global sociology contains a critique from a post-colonial positioning. And then we're going further and saying that post-colonial critique starts intellectually, that post-colonial critique starts intellectually. In the Caribbean, that post-colonial critique starts intellectually in the Caribbean, and it involves not only the empirical disciplines, but it also involves literature and other aesthetic disciplines. The third, well, there are so many that we can get in trouble with respect to the 20 minutes. But what I'm going to quote from you I'm going to quote from you, so I'm going to respond. But before that, I'm giving you your third reading. And your third reading is from Orlando Patterson. You know Orlando Patterson, of course. I hear one man shout. I don't hear any ladies say, I don't hear any of the ladies say anything, because I am not directing my attention to those lecturers at the back. Right? I am directing my attention to the students at the front. Right, but I'm asking the question if you know Orlando Patterson, because Orlando Patterson is a famous Jamaican, right? And he went to this university. And he is famous basically for the sociology of slavery. He's famous basically for the sociology of slavery and for showing some of the continuing dynamics, even in the current situation, related to slavery and colonialism. So we all should know Orlando Patterson. He has worked with many Jamaican governments, and there are many papers and so on. But back to the question of the metaphors, right? This is Orlando quoting Lakoff and Johnson. And this is the quote that you should know. The most fundamental values in a culture will be coherent with the metaphorical structure of the most fundamental concepts in the culture. I'll read it again. The most fundamental values in a culture will be coherent with the metaphorical structure of the most fundamental concepts in the culture. So that metaphors are part of the way in which we think in a culture. And those metaphors are linked to the values we operate with in a culture. So the way we think concepts, the way we organize concepts relate as well to the values that we work with. So that metaphors are fundamental, so that when in a Jamaican situation we use a metaphor such as the plantation, right? Or we use a metaphor such as the plural society, or we use a metaphor such as the absence of ruins, or social debt. Now, all of those metaphors have been used with reference to Jamaican and Caribbean society. And you will see some of those metaphors in sociology, and you will see them and others in the literature. Okay, so Walcott, who died not too long ago, one of his favorite metaphors that he delivered when he got his Nobel Prize speech was the metaphor of fragmentation and the difficulties in reassembling a broken vase or vase, right? So that we are fragmentary and we struggle to bring those fragments together to create the whole that we have lost. But the point I'm making is more than that. I'm saying, yes, read your Orlando Patterson, but in reading the Orlando Patterson, right, this book, The Cultural Matrix, not only does it reference society's Black America that relates to what is happening in Jamaica, but it also involves a view of culture. It also involves a view of culture and a relationship between culture and action that embraces the psychological. And that is a persistent feature in all of the three sets of references that I have given you. And what I'm saying for people who are going to be HRD professionals and organizational behavior professionals, what I'm saying is that within our post-colonial condition, you have to have a notion of sociology that integrates across disciplines and bring psychology into relations with sociology. And you have to further to recognize that all interactions and transformational projects in the organization, in the society, in Jamaican society, always have a critical historical psychological element. So that one of the biggest challenges you're going to have, is producing this integrated analysis and producing a practice with others and in the organization that deals with this psychological baggage, but at the same time allows for the possibilities of transformation. The last point, I'm over. The last point that we are going to make is that don't look for the essence of the society simply in terms of questions of class and cultural conflict and so on. One of the central features of Jamaican society that organizational people have to face is the fact that one of the dimensions of the greatest conflict and problematic in the culture is the clash between the formal system of regulations and the informal nature of a rapidly spreading everyday life. So that good sociologists usually talk about the way in which the state monopolizes power and force in the society and controls things. Jamaica is a little island, and yet, small as the island is, the state cannot control the island. Barbados is small as a campus here. It's an even smaller island. And the crop over was disrupted this year by the break of gunfighting, the breakout of gunfighting between gangs in Bridgetown, Barbados. So the point I am making is that one of the challenges and the conceptual innovations that organizational people will make involves this tension between formal control and informal organization. And I'll tell you two things about informal organization that you need to note and why this tension is problematic and need careful attention if we are going to transform. The two things I'm telling you is that, one, when you study the informal organization, you suddenly realize that Jamaicans and West Indians are not lethargic and they're not dependent. Everybody is trying to set up their own derricks. Everybody is trying to set up their own organization. Everybody is battling against everybody in trying to organize their life. So there is a very strong vitality that comes from people looking for opportunities and taking control of their circumstances. The problem, though, is that this means that there's a continual tension between the formal and the informal. And very often, the informal is chaotic and full of conflict. Now, all of that is going to migrate into your organizations. So you have both the global nature of the circumstances, the historical nature of the circumstances, and the importance of the local dynamics in going forward into your studies in HRD and organizational behavior. So that HRD and organizational behavior is very exciting intellectual stuff, but it's very trying stuff for somebody who takes their job seriously and is trying to transform the society. So those are my few opening words. Remember that all that I say to you, I get by looking on my computer. I don't have to go to the library, so that people, and my eyes are not good and I'm old and all of that, so that you have no excuses for not getting information. It is all out there.